Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and not long ago I did a video on World of Warcraft best classes or best considered classes by the general community for Mythic Plus dungeons in this brand new patch of 8.3. And now that the raid for Neolotha has been out for a couple days in Mythic and it's gotten through a couple cycles on Heroic, it is time for me to do a video on what is considered to be the quote-unquote best classes as chosen by the community at large of what you should be playing when it comes to some of the more competitive sides of the raid inside of Neolotha. Keep in mind, these are not my opinions, and for me, I believe that you should play whatever class you want to play. In the end, Blizzard does try to balance the game so that just about every single tank can do heroics. But we are going to be particularly talking about the Mythic Neolotha and the top ends of the raid. But it is my personal belief that, honestly, just about any class and spec can be viable even at the Mythic levels of this brand new raid. So when you go on YouTube and you see just about every top tier player talk about what are the best classes that they will recommend you. Now we are going to be breaking this down into the melee, the ranged, the healers, and the tanks in this particular order because this has been my experience in WoW, mostly starting with the melee as I play a variety of different classes, majority of them being melee. Then the range classes, then healers, which I dabbled with a little bit, and then tanks where I have the least amount of experience. Let's start with the melee. So the general acceptance for the melee are going to put something like a Death Knight or a Paladin at number 3. They all seem like a decent solid choice whether you play Retribution, Frost, or Unholy, and with Frost and Unholy in particular, you do have the capability of switching between one and the other specs. Also, being a Death Knight and Paladin does allow you to switch into a healer role or a tank role depending on the fight when it comes to progression, so you can tag on an extra healer or an extra tank if a mechanic might want you to. These classes also bring quite a bit of utility. Paladin is chock full of useful spells, whether it is Bubble for self-defensiveness, you also have Blessing of Protection which can be applied for other allies, you have Hand of Freedom, you have Lay on Hands, you have quite a bit of resources to work with, and you even have talents that might even allow for a little bit extra puff of AoE healing. So Paladins are kind of like a Swiss Army knife. With Death Knights, you don't really have quite a variety of different tools, but Death Grip is quite huge. Also, having a ranged interrupt does allow you to play around with mechanics while also being on top of the interrupts far easier. The number 2 class a lot of people recommend will have to be Rogue. Now, Rogues would have either been number 2 or number 1 because they've been so good all of Battle for Azeroth, and with them not getting a single nerf for patch 8.3, of course they were going to be really strong. But when people talk about Rogues and why they put them on number 2, which is a pretty high spot out of all the other melee, first of all, they're very survivable. With the Cloak, Vanish, you have Evasion or Parry when you're Outlaw, and Feint does let you a little bit extra survivability to sometimes just stand inside of mechanics and keep DPS in the boss. Also, this is one of those classes where a mechanic might kill everybody else, the rogue might have a different way of dealing with mechanics, which gives them a lot more of that versatility. Plus, tagged on the extra mobility that every single rogue spec brings, they're actually quite great at dealing with mechanics, and they should be able to avoid majority of them. You also have great damage between the output of Assassination that can dumpster raid bosses and obliterate them in single target. And also switch to Outlaw, which is a fairly easy playstyle to get into, where you turn on Blade Flurry and cleave the world. That versatility is what a lot of people at the top end really prefer and like. Being able to just swap to a different spec and being able to be insanely good at that particular role is something that does make rogues very strong. Finally, for number 1 spot, I'm going to put 2 classes in this one because some people say one thing, some people say another, some people include this class in a top 3, others don't, but Warriors and Demon Hunters are both pretty damn good. Warriors and Demon Hunters all bring a raid buff, so you have to have at least one of them in your raid, and if you are not going to run a Venged Demon Hunter or a Protection Warrior, you will want a Fury or Arms Warrior or a Havoc Demon Hunter. Warriors and Demon Hunters also bring raid utility, whether it is Darkness or Rallying Cry, which are both crucial to a group survivability to deal with mechanics. You kind of need a warrior for now 2 reasons, same with the Demon Hunter. Both of those classes also have overall excellent damage, whether it is Cleave, 1 target, 3 targets, 5 targets, a massive pack of enemies and an AoE. Both of those classes can deal with any type of encounter, whether you need Burst, whether you need Sustain, they all have excellent damage output. You also have good to excellent mobility depending on the fight, and they're both very tanky, so they can survive mechanics and have even some self-heal to them, so that's one less mouth to feed for the healer. The one class that, however, is not mentioned a lot when it comes to some of the research I've been doing for the melee, at least what a lot of people are saying, is Windwalker Monks. Now, they recently just got a single target buff for this brand new raid. And I feel like Windwalker Monks are really not terrible. They do quite good in AoE, like a Demon Hunter or a Fury Warrior, and their single target seems to be improving, and as everybody gets better gear, and Windwalkers I feel like will be able to stand toe-to-toe with other classes as well. And if for whatever reason your guild doesn't have a Mistweaver or a Brewmaster, they also bring a mandatory buff. So while not a lot of these guide top 3 best melee videos and graphs show monks anywhere near the top, I did want to give them an honorable mention. I feel like they are honestly in a good spot, and a very geared monk with some endgame gear from the brand new raid could actually be very strong and viable. Moving on to the range classes, we get a lot less diversity. In the top 3, we're going to have Warlocks, Mages, and Boomkins. Some people rank one of these classes above others, some people rank them below, but generally what I keep hearing is Warlocks, Mages, and Balance Druids. Warlocks, Mages, and Boomkins. That's apparently all you need to know. The reason why people go for Warlocks, Mages, and Boomkins as some of the best range classes out there is, one, they have that diversity of damage. They can do good single target, or they can do a little bit of cleave. You got Boomkins with their powerful Star Surges and dot damage. You got your Fire Mages with a mastery that will spread to others with that massive unloading damage. And you also have Warlocks between Destruction and Affliction that can focus on purely dot damage on multiple enemies, cleaving enemies down, or purely single target. So you have that diversity of the damage output where you are essentially good in any fight. And those are the classes that will be brought to literally every fight in Neolotha. That or those classes have a utility, like Boomkins with the Innervate, or with Warlocks, Healthstones, and Gateways to give everybody in the raid a little bit of extra mobility. Mages, I guess, also do provide a raid buff, so they are also considered very highly because of that buff, but also that damage. Some of the range classes I hear very little about are Elemental Shamans and Priests, which I think are all in a good spot. In my honest opinion, because this fight does prefer dot-based classes, I mean, it's a lot more friendlier to melees, but still, dot-based classes do really well in this raid. Elemental Shamans and Priests are really good at that as well. The single target out of both of those classes is also good, and I would say it's close to on par with Warlocks, Mages, and Balance Druids, but as we're getting better gear, as more bosses are put under the knife, as more guilds are able to advance further, I think, honestly, we'll see more Elemental Shamans and Priests out there. And I know that Priests have gotten a nerf, but Blizzard keeps nerfing them every single tier, every single raid, and they still end up being the top and DPS by the end of that tier. So maybe these nerfs aren't going to be nearly as bad once people get some gear on them. For healers, I got good news. All healers are essentially good. Now, the fast answer to answer this, if you want a healer to heal, then all of them are great at that. If you want a healer to do damage, then Disciplined Priest and Holy Paladins bring plenty of side damage that naturally occurs while they heal. So if you want to know the best ones, Disciplined Priest and Holy Paladins are still probably going to be top tier. However, all the healers are good. Healers bring different toolkits to different fights. Some are better than others depending on those fights. And most healers are viable because all of them essentially heal. Hell, every healer could even go for a more damage-oriented build with certain Azeroth traits, certain essences, brand new trinkets that we have access to from the new raid, and all this corruption gear can now viably create different builds if damage is the priority, like meeting a certain DPS check on a boss or phasing it before an ability hits the whole raid. But even then, you can have very interesting and kind of wonky, wacky combinations. For example, on Azara Mythic, we could bring a Holy Priest as well as a Restoration Druid for the throughput. They will be there to heal majority of the group and really pump out those green numbers, while we would have our Shaman go into a Battle Shaman with Elemental Shaman traits and more an offensive playstyle, utilizing his cooldowns mostly for healing towards the end of the fight, but for the rest of the fight he was mostly there DPSing, throwing down totems when we needed, and we were able to phase the boss and get the number checks that we needed if, let's say, our DPS weren't up to par that night. And with the introduction of corrupted gear, you can really get creative. So with a variety of different healers, I would say that people say some healers are better than others, of course. If you are looking for soft DPS while providing essentially great healing, Disc Priest and Holy Paladin stand out easily, but I feel like with the gear and the different combinations you might be able to play with, I feel like there's a lot of room to play around with. Now, tanks in the game are fairly well balanced when it comes to the heroic version of this brand new raid. Just about any tank can make a value play, and tanks are good in certain fights, but when it comes to the mythic, I think for the most part everybody keeps sounding off the same ideas and same classes, no matter where I have looked. But I feel like with tanks, there might be a little bit more restrictiveness in terms of, you want the strongest, the toughest guy out there leading the charge, performing the mechanics properly. And certain tanks just simply don't have the same tankiness, the same toughness that others may bring, or utility that might be invaluable to groups. So while tanks, I would say, are ranked far more harshly in terms of what is going to be the ultimately best tank for the hardest content in the game, but you would want to play the best tank possible because the responsibility at that type of content, at that height of the difficulty curve, does become a lot more, I guess, emphasized in this regard. Majority of the stuff that I see puts Brewmasters at the top. Even though they've gotten nerfed in this patch 8.3, they're still looking like a very solid tank for progression. If you're trying to get further into the fight, you would bring a Brewmaster for any type of situation. Followed by Demon Hunters for their capability to deal with magic damage better than other tanks, and Blood Death Knights because they can heal through all the magic damage they tank. It seems that in this raid in particular, magic damage is huge, and you will take a lot of magic damage outside of just the physical. So any class that performs exceptionally well with physical damage, but doesn't really take magic damage all that well, really does get left on the sidelines. That being, majority of people put away the warriors, the bearers, and the paladins. In my opinion, I would take just about any tank that knows their class and knows how to play it in any Mythic Plus and just about any raid. But when it comes to doing some of the hardest raids on mythic difficulty of Neolotha, being a tank and bringing the best tank to the fights will make the fight for your healers and even for your DPS far easier. So I think this is why people are focusing on specific tanks in order to make it easiest for their group. The player's personal skill level is what I value the most. This is why for Mythic Pluses at any level, at any key, I'm fine with any tank in the game. If they know how to play their class, they know how to overcome the challenges that might come from a dungeon, I'm perfectly fine with it. But inside of a raid and mythic raid, this should be some of the hardest content in the game out there. So it's understandable why people have a very specific choice of which tank we play. However, before the end of Neolotha, I think just about every tank is going to get a kill on Mythic N'Zoth. Trust me, as we get better gear, we'll get more information on how to deal with different types of fights, more metas will come out, and Blizzard will probably adjust bosses a little bit. Because no one so far has seen Mythic N'Zoth, and pretty sure there's going to be a couple nerfs happening to that boss. But this is going to be the list of what everybody considers to be the top and healers, tanks, and DPS, ranged or melee, for Mythic Neolotha. Again, I do want to mention we haven't seen the end of this raid yet, and this is going to be the last raid of BFA, and Blizzard doesn't have any purpose of keeping people away from killing the very last boss of Battle for Azeroth. So as people get to the boss fights, people will figure out more metas and different ways to deal with bosses. There'll be buffs and most likely a lot of nerfs as we go on through the fight. The one class I didn't mention in this list, and this one is the one nobody talks about, and I want to make sure I did, are Hunters. Now, a lot of people before Neolotha came out were saying that, oh, Hunters are a dead class, the dead spec, nobody's going to play Hunter, they're going to be the worst because they're not Boomkins or Priests or Rogues or Demon Hunters or anything like that, but Hunters are actually still doing really well. Even Survival Hunter is actually dominating and dumpstering some of the bosses in Mythic Neolotha, funnily enough. So if you play a Hunter, I think you're a mid-tier class. You are good, you're not terrible. You don't bring the raid utility that other classes would want, but a skilled hunter is a skilled player. It could be because that by the end of the gearing process, hunters will be the ones that will scale the worst with gear, while everybody else will scale amazingly. But in our raid situation right now, they're actually doing quite well. They actually work well with a lot of the fights because there's a lot of mobility and damage that they can work around, and so far they've been doing really well, but they haven't been the highlights for majority of people's graphs or videos, or whenever you ask them to recommend top tier classes, nobody really talks about Hunter. But I want to make sure to call you guys out. Hunters are great, they're doing good, they're not like tippity top in a lot of people's videos, but they are doing well, they're not a bad class. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know your thoughts if you agree with any of these lists. I just wanted to compile what everybody else has been saying about Neolotha and put it into one single video. Do you guys agree with these lists at all or not? Again, this video is also made with people's thought processes on Mythic Neolotha, not really as much as Heroic. In Heroic, just about every class and spec can play, but in Mythic at the highest end levels, do you guys agree with these lists or not? Thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see all of you in another video.